My name is Lillian, and at 32, I should have felt secure, earning enough to afford a mortgage on a small house where the kitchen smelled of fresh bread in the mornings, and the windows overlooked a quiet street lined with maple trees that glowed so brightly in autumn that it seemed life itself was telling me there was still much to come. And even though the house was small, even though the walls sometimes creaked at night, I loved it the way you love your first child, because it was yours, and no one could take it away. Working as a sales representative paid well. It was nerve-wracking, sure, but it brought stability, and I clung to that stability as tightly as I clung to a mug of hot coffee in the morning when the world seemed too big. I had my parents, and I had an older sister, Karen, who was 35, and she always stood out because it wasn't me or her who decided that. But Mom and Dad, when they assigned roles to me as children, she was to be the favorite, and I was to be the shadow. Karen had 2 boys after her divorce, Jake, 8, and Tommy, 10. They were loud, funny, always hungry, always fighting over trivial things, and yet so vulnerable that my heart broke when I saw them in old jackets, because her salary only covered rent and food, and every month I charged her my card, sending it as if it were a tax for the right to breathe near her. So what could I do? She was struggling with her problems, and I helped, although honestly, this has been my whole life, helping her even when no one helped me. I remembered how, as a child, they made me do her math homework because I understood numbers, and she didn't. And instead of making her study, they made me waste my evenings on other people's problems. When she wanted piano lessons, I asked too, but they said, "We only have enough for one." And they chose her, and that's how it's always been. When I was getting straight A's and she was barely scraping by with C's, they'd say, "Help Karen, don't get cocky," instead of "good job," and it would sink into my skin like acid. They bought her a car when she turned 16, and when my time came, they told me, "You'll split it," even though it was actually hers. When it came time for college, they paid for her in full, and I was told to take out loans because she needed help, and I could handle it. And the list could go on, like the rusty chain I'd been chained to since birth. So when my phone rang on Tuesday morning and Karen appeared on the screen, I already knew. More money, more nagging, more responsibility. But when I picked up, her voice sounded different. Something inside me clicked. It was happy. Real. I didn't even believe it at first. "Lillian, you know what?" she almost sang. "I quit my job." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "What are you talking about?" I gasped. "Karen, what are you even talking about?" And then, with that air of hers, as if the world owed her, she calmly said, "I've had enough. I went to see the manager this morning and told her I'm done. No more notices. I'm free." My heart sank as if I'd fallen down the stairs. "Karen, how are you going to pay the rent? How are you going to feed Jake and Tommy?" I almost screamed, and she laughed as if I'd said something incredibly funny, as if kids and bills were such a trivial matter that it was silly to worry about. "Don't worry. You make good money. You'll support me for a while until I get some rest, get my bearings, and find something better." I sat there, staring at the phone as if it were broken, unable to believe my ears. "Karen," I managed to say, my chest burning, "I'm not going to support you." "This is crazy. You have 2 kids. You have responsibilities." Her voice immediately became sharp, icy, the way it always did when she didn't get what she wanted. "Well, if you don't help me voluntarily, I'll call Mom and Dad. They'll make you do the right thing." And then, the dial tone. She hung up. I sat there, holding that damn phone, and a sickening feeling welled up inside me. An old, familiar, achingly familiar feeling. The same one I'd felt as a child when she threatened to tell my parents if I didn't agree to do what she wanted. That was her weapon. Always. A complaint, pressure, a threat, and every time I gave in. She was going to run that circle again, to Mom, to Dad, and then back to me when they told her to, like always. About half an hour later, the phone blared again, so loudly that my heart nearly jumped out of my chest, and when I looked at the screen, I saw that same name that always meant trouble. Mom. I picked up the phone, and her voice hit my ears before I could even say a word. "Lillian Marie Thompson, what's wrong with you?" Every word was spat out as if I'd stolen years of her life. "Hey, Mom, what are you talking about?" I muttered, but she didn't give me a second. "Don't play dumb." "Karen just called me in tears, telling me you refused to help her when she needed it most. How can you be so selfish?" Her voice shook with anger, and I could practically see her pacing the kitchen with the phone, wiping away Karen's tears in her mind. I gritted my teeth. "Mom, she quit her job with nothing, and now she's expecting me to pay all her bills while she sits at home and recovers. It's crazy." But Mom, of course, had already chosen a side. "She's not taking time off, Lillian. She's been through a terrible divorce. She needs time. You have a good job and a home, and the least you can do is help your sister." I couldn't take it anymore. "Help? You call full financial support help? That's absurd." And at that moment, her voice turned icy, as if she'd convinced herself, "Yes, you're obligated to support her until she decides to go back to work." I opened my mouth to reply, but she interrupted me. "And even if you don't like it, we've already made a decision. Karen and the boys are moving in with you. You have a spacious bedroom upstairs. They can live there." I almost choked. "What? They're moving? Mom, no one even asked me about this." The words flew out of me like gunshots, but Mom was adamant. "We're not asking, Lillian. We're telling you how it will be. Karen needs space, and you have it." I felt my stomach clench and squeezed out. "This is my home. Mine. The home I pay for every month, not yours." "Family helps family," she snapped. "Karen would do the same for you." I almost laughed at the lie. "No, Mom, she would never do that. Karen has never done anything for me in her life that she didn't have to." But I knew perfectly well that arguing with Mom was like banging your head on concrete, painful and pointless. Then Dad grabbed the phone, his hoarse voice cutting into my ear. "Lillian, you need to clean the bedroom. The boys will need space for their things." I swallowed, but didn't give in. "Dad, I don't want anyone living in my house." And he barked so loudly that I jerked the phone away from my ear. "Too bad. Karen is your sister, and these are your nephews. Stop being so damn selfish." And then the beeps. That's it. I sat in the car in the parking lot near work, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to hold back the tears. There it was. It was like always again. Karen does what she wants, and I'm left to deal with the consequences. She quit out of the blue, on a whim, and now somehow I'm the one who has to decide how to feed her children and pay for her living expenses. I sat there, staring into space, and suddenly remembered something. 4 months ago, my boss, Tom, offered me a transfer to another office in a neighboring state, and I turned it down because I'd just bought a house and didn't want to give it up. But what if that opportunity still existed? I jumped up, returned to the office building, and practically ran to Tom's office, knocked on the door, and walked in. "Hey, Tom, remember you were talking about transferring to Denver? Is this position still available?" I felt my voice tremble, but inside everything was clenching into a fist. He leaned back in his chair and narrowed his eyes. "What suddenly interested you now?" I almost laughed. "It's a really long story. When can I start?" He smiled and leaned forward slightly. "Damn, Lillian, I've been holding on to this position, hoping you'd change your mind." "You can start Monday." I exhaled as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "Then yes, I want to transfer." "Great," he said. "I'll call. We'll work it out." When I left his office, I already knew there was no time. I dialed Mike, an old friend of mine who was involved in real estate. "Mike, I need a favor. Urgent. I need tenants for my house. People who are reliable, solvent, and who can take care of the place." He paused for a second. "What are you talking about? You just bought this house?" I closed my eyes. "It's a long story. I'll tell you later. I need it done quickly. This week." "Okay," he said cautiously. "I'll see what I can do." I spent the rest of the day in a frenzy, making lists, writing plans, scribbling, crossing things out, starting over. I knew I had very little time. If my family thought they could just show up with suitcases, barge into my house, and turn my life into an extension of their chaos, they were mistaken. This time, I wasn't going to give in to my walls without a fight. I knew I had a week, tops, to get out, pack everything and start over, because Karen, her boys, and Mom and Dad could show up any day now, and I had to be far away, somewhere where they couldn't make decisions for me. I took sick leave for the rest of the week because I couldn't sit in the office with a forced smile and pretend I had everything under control any longer. Every day after that, I lived like a madman, moving around the house with boxes, bags, and lists, keeping only what I truly needed to survive: clothes, documents neatly folded into folders, the laptop that was my second memory, and a few things I couldn't breathe without: an old mug with a crack where the coffee always tasted better, a graduation photo where I still believed life would be fair, and a small porcelain dog a high school friend had once given me, the only gift no one had ever taken from me. I put everything else in storage or left it for future tenants, as if I were clearing out the house of my past, frozen in furniture and trifles. Mike turned out to be a salvation. By Thursday, he'd found a couple with a child looking for a house to rent in my neighborhood, and I looked at them with a mixture of suspicion and hope. The husband, silent and confident, the wife with a soft schoolteacher's smile, and a 7-year-old daughter with pigtails and a curious gaze. When they said they were ready to move in immediately and pay the first and last month's rent up front, I felt the world tilt. We signed the lease on Friday morning, and now the rent was supposed to trickle straight into my account. But I stood there, pen in hand, thinking it was surreal, because I'd fought so furiously and proudly for this house, paying every damn mortgage note, and now I was suddenly handing over the keys to strangers. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. By Friday evening, I was already loading the last boxes into the car, my hands dusty, my hair sweaty, and my heart pounding as if I were escaping. I'd already sent some of the boxes to Denver, where I'd found a simple but decent apartment online that I could rent month to month. Now, as I packed every package, every blanket, every book, I thought, I'm leaving. I'm really leaving. On Saturday morning, I got behind the wheel and drove to Denver. The drive seemed endless, but my inner wings gradually spread, and by Monday, I was already sitting in my new office. It was smaller and simpler than my old one, but the people there were smiling, the work was familiar, and Tom gave me a great recommendation, so my new boss welcomed me almost like family. On Tuesday, I was settling into the apartment, putting food in the fridge, pulling up the internet cable, putting a mug on the kitchen counter. It all felt strange, like I was playing with someone else's life, but at the same time, for the first time in years, I felt liberated. My family couldn't just show up on the doorstep without calling, complaining, and demanding. I was finally at a distance that couldn't be crossed in a 20-minute drive. On Wednesday afternoon, Mike called, his voice simultaneously excited and cautious. "Lillian, I have good news for you, and maybe some dramatic news." I chuckled. The good news first. "Your tenants have moved in. They love the place, and they've already paid their rent for the month. Nice people." I exhaled. Great. What about the dramatic news? And then his voice took on a heaviness. "Yesterday afternoon, a woman showed up at your house with 2 children and what sounded like half a U-Haul truck full of things. She started pounding on the door, demanding to be let in." My stomach sank, even though I'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Let me guess," I said. "My sister Karen?" "I'm guessing," he replied. "The tenants called me because they didn't know what to do." She screamed that it was her sister's house, and she had every right to live there. I closed my eyes and clenched my teeth, imagining the scene. "What happened next?" I asked, and Mike sighed. "The tenants explained to her that they had a lease and that you had moved out, but she wouldn't listen. Then an older couple, I think your parents, pulled up, and a huge argument broke out right there on the lawn. They were yelling at each other so much that the neighbors came out to watch, and someone even filmed it on their phone. Eventually, everyone left, but your parents wrote down my number from the agency sign." I laughed, briefly, sharply, with a hint of bitterness. I was afraid of this confrontation, Mike, but now that it's happened, it's even funny. They came all this way expecting to just move into my house, and they found strangers there. He paused for a second. They didn't call you? I sighed. No. Well, listen, about an hour later, your mom called me. She screamed, demanding to know where you'd gone. I told her I couldn't divulge that information, but she wouldn't let up, screaming that you were her daughter and she had a right to know. That night, the phone started going crazy, as if someone was deliberately harassing me, as if I was supposed to be on duty at the line, taking orders. First, Mom's name appeared. I stared at the screen, at the familiar letters that had symbolized power over me my entire life, and without a second's hesitation, I let the call go to voicemail, because I knew that if I heard her voice, I wouldn't be able to bear it and would either break down or give in. A couple of minutes later, Dad called, then Karen, and I stared at this endless stream of calls as if they were spam from some evil force, and simply ignored them all, because inside I no longer had the strength to answer. I only wanted silence. When the calls died down, the messages began, and each one appeared on the screen with a nasty beep that made my heart twitch. Mom would write, "Lillian, call us right now. We came to your house and there are strangers there. Where are you?" Dad would add, "This is ridiculous. Lillian, call us back immediately." And of course Karen with her eternal pitiful note, "I can't believe you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to live and you just disappeared." I stared at all those words, cold and sticky, and finally switched my phone to silent, tossed it on the nightstand, and went to bed, though sleep was as heavy as a wet blanket, and I still dreamed of their reproachful faces. The next morning I sat down with a cup of coffee staring at the screen where 12 missed calls and 23 messages already lit up, scrolling through them as if I were reading someone else's diary. Karen continued to whine. "The landlord said you moved somewhere, but he didn't say where." It's so confusing. Mom, in her usual style, "Young lady, you better explain yourself right now." Dad hit me where it hurt. "You can't just run away from your responsibilities." And again, Karen, playing on pity, "Jake and Tommy are asking where Aunt Lillian went." What should I tell them? I sat there thinking that if I didn't answer, they would pester me forever, so I typed a short, dry message addressed only to my mother. "I've moved. Stop looking for me." And I hit send, feeling like I'd put a full stop to it. Several hours of silence passed, and I almost believed it was the end, that maybe they'd finally left me alone. But that evening, my phone vibrated, and there was a new message from my mother. "If you don't come home right now and let Karen live with you, we'll erase you. You're no longer our daughter." I sat there for a long time, holding the screen in my hands, and my insides clenched. Yes, part of me felt pain, because I knew this blow was bound to happen, but another part, the big, grown-up and tired part, felt relief, almost liberation, because if their love was a condition, and that condition was that I had to let them control my life, then it was better to be alone. I wrote a short reply. "Go ahead. Continue," and put the phone down, as if closing a heavy door. The next few days passed surprisingly calmly, and there was something frighteningly sweet in that silence, as if I were breathing deeply for the first time. No calls, no messages, and I even began to believe that maybe they had finally given up. But I knew my family too well to believe in miracles. And sure enough, Karen soon posted her plaintive poem on Facebook, which I read by chance because one of my cousins sent me the link. There, in front of the whole world, she played the tragic widow, writing, "Well, I guess I understand how some people are treated. I quit my job because I was burned out and needed time to recover from the divorce, and my sister refused to help me. Now I have no income and nowhere to live with 2 small children. Shouldn't family help? I guess for some people, money is more important than family." The comments poured in like poison. Karen's friends flocked from all corners, each adding their own criticism. "Oh my God, Karen, this is terrible. Your sister seems selfish. Family should always come first. I'm sorry you're going through this." Some people forget where they came from. And when I saw my mom like the post, I felt disgusted, as if I'd been publicly and gleefully betrayed. But the most interesting part came next. Relatives started joining the comments, and not all of them were on her side. Lisa, our cousin, wrote harshly and bluntly, "Wait, didn't you quit your job without finding another one? And aren't you getting child support?" Uncle Mark chimed in, "Karen, you decided to quit on your own." "It's not Lillian's responsibility," Aunt Sarah added gently but firmly. "I love you both, but Lillian shouldn't have to support you indefinitely just because you decided to take a break from work." I sat and watched it all unfold live on air, and I could see the argument getting heated. Karen's friends continued to hug her with words and defend her, but the further it went, the more relatives began to openly say that she had driven herself into this situation, that she had alimony from her ex-husband, that Jake and Tommy would not starve, and that it was time to stop demanding that others decide her life. That evening, I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes that hadn't yet been fully unpacked, a glass of cheap wine in my hand, thinking about all the crap that had befallen me in the last few weeks. And suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't thought about for a long time, but which was etched into my memory like a knife. That very call from my parents 6 months ago, when they complained that things were going badly, that my father's company was laying off people and he was now only working part-time, that my mother was still behind the cash register in her shabby department store, dragging herself home with a sore back and a tiny salary, and that the mortgage was strangling them so that they were barely making ends meet. And then they asked me, as a good daughter, to help them, even if it was just for a while. I remember being stupid and obedient, opening my banking app and setting up an automatic transfer of $800 every month, not even considering how much I was shouldering myself, simply because they said they couldn't handle it without me. And I paid it month after month without even thinking, simply accepting it as a given, that this was how it was supposed to be, until I suddenly realized tonight that my mother had literally thrown me out of the family with words, like a bag of trash. And Karen, that eternal victim and princess, and the P, had made me look like a villain in front of everyone. And in that moment, I realized clearly, I no longer owe these people anything, because they acted like strangers who only knew how to suck my blood. I opened the app, clicked a few buttons, and canceled the transfer, feeling as if I'd cut with scissors the rope that had held me for years. I took a screenshot of the confirmation and immediately sent it to both my parents with a short, blunt message. "Since you've cut me out, I'm no longer paying a mortgage for strangers." The phone rang 3 minutes later, as if they'd been waiting for the blow. This time, I decided to answer, and as soon as I said, "Hello," my mother's voice exploded on the line so loudly that I jerked the phone away from my ear. She screamed, "Lillian, what did you just do? You can't do that. We need that money. We can't make the mortgage payment without it." And for the first time in my life, I didn't make excuses or explain myself, but simply replied calmly, "It sounds like it's your problem, Mom." I heard her start to sob, and her voice cracked. "Lillian, please. Karen and the boys are living with us now because she has nowhere else to go. We can't afford to feed them and pay the mortgage without your help." And I said bluntly, mercilessly, "Then maybe Karen should get a job." Mom immediately exploded, "She's still recovering from the divorce. She needs time." And I interrupted, "She needs an income, Mom. She has 2 kids to feed." She started complaining that Dad was now only working part-time and that it wasn't enough, and I said what had been pent up in me for years. Then, let Dad find a permanent job, or at least a part-time job, like normal people do when they're struggling with money. And then Mom completely burst into tears, and her voice was hysterical. "How can you be so cruel? This is all your fault. If you had just let Karen stay with you, like we planned, none of this would have happened." And my blood boiled, because blaming me was the height of insolence, and I said, "My fault? Karen quit without finding a new job, and it's no one's fault but hers. And you decided to support her instead of telling her it's time to grow up and be responsible. It's your choice. She's family. But I'm family too. And that didn't stop you from humiliating me every time I didn't do what you wanted." Mom kept babbling about how they didn't want to, that I was misunderstanding everything, but I interrupted her. "It's too late, Mom. You've made your choice." And I pressed end call. I immediately turned off my phone so I wouldn't hear any calls or messages. I was shaking a little. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But at the same time, I felt something I hadn't known for years. Lightness. Freedom. That freedom when you finally say no and stand your ground. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't buckle under their pressure, didn't let them break me. The next 2 weeks were like a dream. No calls, no hysterics, just silence, work, and a new city I was gradually discovering. I immersed myself in work, meeting colleagues, strolling the streets of Denver, visiting coffee shops and stores, feeling like I was finally living my own life, not someone else's. And most amazingly, everything was working out. I had a great salary, plus a steady income from renting a house, and my finances were looking better than ever before. Then the phone rang, and when I saw Tom's name on the screen, my former boss, with whom we'd supposedly parted ways on good terms, but whom I'd never expected to hear from now, my stomach turned cold, because I knew immediately that this conversation wouldn't lead to anything good. He began without preamble. "Lillian, I need to tell you about a strange incident today." I tensed, the glass of wine hovering in my hand, and managed to squeeze out, "What happened?" Tom, hesitating slightly, said, "Your mother came to my office and demanded to see me. She said she had to force you to send money to your family." My head spun and I almost screamed, "Oh my God, what exactly did she say?" Tom replied quietly, as if he himself was embarrassed. "She said you were being irresponsible and selfish, and that as your boss, I should have either convinced you to send them the money or just deducted it from your paycheck and wired it to her." My mouth went dry, and I just whispered, "Tom, I'm horrified. I'm so sorry. I didn't even know she was capable of such a thing." He quickly cut me off. "Hey, don't worry. I told her point blank that what you do with your money is none of my business, and certainly none of the company's. I also told her that her offer felt like stealing." I stared at the wall and asked, "So how did she react to that?" Tom sighed. "She burst into tears and said her family would lose their home." I felt sorry for her, but there was nothing I could do. I just wanted to warn you in case she tried anything else. When he hung up, I remained sitting in my chair as if I'd been slapped. My mother had gone so far as to go to my former office and try to force my boss to steal my money. This was a new, sticky, disgusting low, even for her. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the apartment, clutching my phone, thinking that if they'd gone to this lengths, they weren't going to leave me alone. Karen was home with her parents with her 2 children, neither of whom worked full-time, yet they all seemed to expect me to be a perpetual ATM for their greedy and lazy lives. Then I decided this couldn't go on. I opened my laptop and started writing them a letter. It took 2 hours to make sure every word was crisp, icy, and crystal clear, with no room for manipulation. I wrote, "Mom, Dad, Karen. Today my ex-boss called me and told me that my mother came to his office and demanded that he steal money from my paycheck to send to you. This is stalking, and it must stop immediately. I am recording every call, every message, and every attempt to interfere with my work. If any of you continue to harass me, if you contact me through my employers again or demand money from me, I will file for a restraining order. I have proof. Call logs, screenshots of your messages demanding money, and my ex-boss's testimony about my mother's visit to the office. You yourself said that I am no longer your daughter. I have accepted that. Now leave me alone. Any attempt to contact me will be considered harassment and will be reported to the police." When I hit send and sent the email to all 3, I felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from my chest. Then I blocked their numbers on my phone so as not to hear their voices even by accident. 3 days passed in complete silence, then a week, then a second. I began to believe that maybe the threat of a lawsuit had finally gotten through to their thick heads, and they realized I was serious and that my hand wouldn't tremble. Maybe they finally realized I wasn't some convenient puppet they could pull their strings with. That evening, my cousin Lisa called. I saw her name and sighed, "Hi, Lisa." She cheerfully asked, "So, how are things in Denver?" I replied, "I'm doing well. I'm working and settling in. How are things at home?" Lisa paused for a second, then quietly said, "Well, your family definitely isn't coping. Your dad had to get a second job. He's now carrying boxes at the grocery store, and Karen went back to work. Your mom keeps telling everyone you abandoned the family, but honestly, most people think it's Karen's fault. She drove herself into trouble." I was silent for a long time until Lisa asked, "What do you think?" And then added more confidently, "I think you did what you had to do. Your family took advantage of you, and they needed to understand that they can't make decisions about your life without even asking you." After we hung up, for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of vindication, as if this whole nightmarish spectacle had finally begun to crumble without me, and the people who had dragged me through their problems for years suddenly remembered what adulthood was. Karen was working again, and while she hated every minute of her new life, she was still going to places where she was getting paid, rather than sitting on the couch, expecting me to solve her problems. Dad was working even harder, shouldering what they had previously shamelessly tried to push onto me. All of them, each in their own way, were finally taking responsibility for their own lives, and for the first time in years, I could breathe deeply without waiting for another call where one of them would beg, accuse, or demand. 3 months had passed since I'd clicked send on that email, every word thick with threat, icy clarity, and my final no. 3 months of complete silence, 3 months that turned out to be the most peaceful of my life, and I found myself waking up without a heavy feeling in my chest, able to go to a bar that evening or get lost on the new streets of Denver without thinking about the next family drama awaiting me tomorrow. One Saturday morning, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the same one where the barista already knew my order and smiled at me as if I belonged there, idly browsing apartment listings on my laptop. The rental income from my house came in like clockwork, every month without a hitch, and my tenants were incredibly nice. They took care of the house as if it were their own, never pestering me with idle complaints, and I could forget I even owned this other piece of property, except for those happy moments when I saw the account balance. Combined with my new salary, this meant I was earning more than I ever had in my life, and now I was faced with a question not of survival, but of choice. I considered buying my own apartment here in Denver, not just a place to live, but a place that would be mine alone, where no one could barge in and claim their place as mine. I flipped through photos of bright living rooms with huge windows, kitchens where steel and granite gleamed, and imagined how, for the first time in years, I could afford a space that no one would take away. Just then, my phone vibrated, and when I saw Lisa's message, my heart sank. She wrote, "I hope you're well. I just thought you should know what's going on." I called her right away. "Hi, Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's the news?" "Well," she hesitated, "your dad works 2 jobs now. He still works part-time at the office during the day and stocks shelves at the grocery store 3 evenings a week. He looks tired, but they seem to be managing to pay the bills. And Karen..." "Oh, Karen's not happy. She's taken a full-time job at a call center and absolutely hates it. She still lives with your parents, and your mom complains about how cramped the house is. Karen and the boys are crammed into your old bedroom, and according to Mom, they fight over space and privacy almost every day. It sounds like hell." I listened and imagined that cramped house, with Karen and her children squeezed into my former walls, where every argument echoed throughout the house, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, small and nasty, like a rusty needle in my heart. Lisa continued, "Mom works overtime at the department store, too." "She looks older, Lillian, as if this whole situation has aged her greatly." I closed my eyes, clenched my teeth, and forced myself to push the feeling away. I knew guilt was a trap they'd used for years to keep me hooked. "Lisa," I said firmly, All of this could have been avoided if they'd treated me like a grown woman, not a purse on legs, if they'd at least once asked if I wanted to carry all this on my own. She sighed. I know. And frankly, most of the family agrees with you. Even Grandma recently said that your parents spoiled Karen too much, and that it was bound to explode sooner or later. After we hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, staring at the ads on the screen and thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I was living in a trap where every mistake my family made automatically became my responsibility. Karen was quitting her job, and I had to save her. My parents were struggling financially, and I had to fill their hole with my earnings. But now, for the first time in my life, everything had changed. Karen was working full-time, my parents were supporting themselves, and I was living the life I'd always wanted, not by watching other people's crises, but by choosing what I loved. I opened my laptop back up and returned to the list of apartments. About 10 minutes from my office, an apartment was for sale that seemed to have been waiting just for me. It was a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking the mountains, so close yet so unattainable that my heart sank with both delight and melancholy. It had a renovated kitchen where I could imagine myself sipping coffee in the morning, watching the sunrise slowly turn the sky pink. I crunched the numbers and realized the monthly mortgage payment was quite manageable, especially when you add up my salary and rental income. And for the first time in years, I felt not dread, but a sense of confidence, an almost daring belief that I could actually afford something for myself. I dialed the realtor's number, my voice shaking with excitement as I scheduled a viewing for Monday, as if it were a date with a new life I had set for myself. That same afternoon, as the sun streamed through the office windows and I was almost losing my patience for Monday, a notification landed in my inbox. Another rent payment had arrived in my account. I opened my banking app and stared at the balance, and the numbers stared back at me as if mocking me, remembering the past when I'd sent hundreds of dollars to Karen every month and another $800 to my parents, adding up to over $1,000, disappearing like water in sand. Back then, I'd saved nothing but a feeling of fatigue and anxiety. But now I could see my money staying with me, accumulating, growing into something solid and reliable beneath my feet. It's no wonder I was living in constant stress back then, as I'd been carrying other people's problems as if that were my destiny. Now, for the first time, I could think not about how to plug someone else's hole, but about building my future, about retirement savings, about true wealth that isn't measured by numbers alone, but also by a sense of freedom. I opened an investment account and promised myself I'd save every month, as if talking to that little girl inside me who'd been waiting her whole life to finally be noticed and cared for. I spent Sunday evening on my laptop researching the neighborhood where the apartment was located. Good schools. Even though I didn't have children, I knew that meant safety and peace. Low crime rate. Prices weren't as exorbitant as I'd expected. Restaurants and shops were within walking distance. Streets where you could stroll without having to look over your shoulder every 5 steps. It was perfect. So perfect I was afraid to believe it. On Monday morning, I met with the realtor. When I walked into the apartment, the air seemed filled with light. The parquet floors gleamed, the windows looked out directly onto the mountains, and I suddenly felt like I was standing in a place that had always been mine. It was just that I'd walked so far to get there. I ran my hand over the smooth walls, looked at the spacious living room, and imagined myself living here, imagining myself closing the door behind me for the first time in my life, knowing there was no one behind it to demand, cry, or blame. The realtor and I went through the paperwork, discussed financing, and I caught myself thinking that it all sounded less like a terrifying jumble of words than like music. With your income, favorable mortgage, 20% down payment, contingency reserves. It was all possible. That evening, I submitted my application, and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely sleep. The salesperson accepted it the next day, and for the first time in a long time, I cried, not from pain, but from happiness. A week later, Lisa called. Her voice was tired, but it rang with that same amused sarcasm she hid when talking about family matters. "Karen's telling everyone you ruined her life," she said, and I laughed so loudly that people in the cafe turned around. "Ruined?" "Me," I replied. "She works and feeds her children like a normal adult. Is that ruining her?" Lisa snickered into the phone. "That's exactly what I told her. But she's sure that if you'd let her stay with you for a few months, she'd have found a great job and everything would have been fine." I rolled my eyes. Or she'd have sat on my couch for months, gobbling up my groceries and watching Netflix while I drowned in her bills again. Lisa chuckled. She can't admit it to herself. "It's easier to blame you than to tell the truth about her decisions." She added that my parents were still working hard to pay the bills, but my mother mentioned me less often now, as if she finally understood. "I'm not coming back." I said quietly but confidently, "Okay," because I'm not coming back. 2 weeks later, I closed the deal. I stood in my new living room, the view of the mountains unfolding before me, and it seemed as if they were smiling at me, like old friends who had been waiting for my return. I felt something I'd never known before: complete independence. My phone was silent, not ringing with alarms and accusations, not bringing messages with yet another request to solve someone else's disaster. And for the first time in my life, there was no remorse or sense of duty in my chest, only silence and freedom. And in the last few months, I'd realized the most important thing. Boundaries weren't cruelty. They weren't selfishness. They were salvation. My family took advantage of my willingness to save them, and they would have done so until the end of time if I hadn't finally said no. Now Karen was working. Now my parents were handling their own bills, and I was building a life that, for the first time I could say it out loud without flinching, was truly mine.